Hello, everyone. Cheryl Hickerson, Females in Finance, and we are on another Tuesday topic in the series for 2023. We are meeting with professionals who have awesome talent to share with all of us. And today, my friend, Cathy Sikorski, who I adore and love, is going to talk with us about financial abuse of elders. And this is a space that she specializes in. And I'm excited to have her talk and share. Cathy, do you want to talk with everybody about your background? And then I've got some questions to run past you.
Sure, I'll give you just a quick behind of my background. I am an elder lawyer for over 30 years. I've been a caregiver for 8 different family members and friends in the last 30 years. I merged those two practices actually because I was a caregiver. I became an elder lawyer that sort of focused my work, and it made me become an elder lawyer because I needed to know all that stuff. And then in the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, I wrote 3 books about this thing because I know that it is really not paid attention to in the way that it should. And then I found people like Cheryl who were doing females in finance because I knew that the money piece and the legal piece were so complex and intertwined that we had to start looking at it together. And so that's why I'm so joyful to be here with you, because it's not just a legal piece and it's not just a financial piece. Everything we do, especially with retirement and aging and the people who take care of them, is really intertwined, and we need to keep that conversation going amongst ourselves so that we can help our clients.
I really appreciate that. The fact that you talked about being a caregiver. I'm kind of curious, just by raise of hands for all of us on the call, how many of you have been a caregiver in your past? And wow, I saw Joy's hands go up too. 2 of them. And a couple of stories real quick with me. I never intended to be a caregiver. My first marriage, I think it was actually a big part of why we got divorced. My first husband, it always makes me sound so callous when I say that that's the reason. It was one of many, but it was a really big piece of it because I was very young when I got married, and I never intended to know that I got married and didn't realize that I would be an immediate caregiver for it was within about the first 5 years. She started like living with us, that it was I was bathing her.
His mother.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I mean, 15 years of it, 15 years of working a full-time job. And we finally had to put her in a facility, to which his family culturally was very against it. And like, that was my job, but I already had a job, like a real one, like I went to, and then as well as the job at home, which is also a real one. And then on top of it was this, and I was exhausted. It had created intense amounts of anxiety, a lot of arguments. You never do the job right enough, good enough, whatever enough. We're never enough as women, I feel like. And it just got to the point where it escalated. And my mother-in-law died May 5th of 2017. And my ex-husband and I were divorced September 17th of 2017. Yeah.
This really dovetails into really, believe it or not, what we're going to talk about today, because the stress and the frustration and the difficulty of caregiving often leads to levels of what would be considered elder abuse.
Yes.
But I also want to have a mini conversation about what is not abuse, because that's really important. Frustration and difficulty and maybe not being able to handle it in the moment, it does not always rise to the level of abuse. And we have to be aware of that as well, right? So that we're not reporting people for just losing their temper once with their mom or
Yeah.
twice or whatever, right? So anyway,
And that's
yes.
really important. I shared at the beginning of this call with you today because my fear was it was driving me so fruit that I was starting to get very upset all the time. Like you're like dread the ride home. And I already have kids and homework and all the activities they're doing. And then to
Yeah.
add this layer. And my fear was she needed someone to care for her. And it was not me.
And it can lead to abuse. Let's be honest. It can actually just break down to that's exactly what starts happening, because you have no tools to handle this and no support system to handle it, right?
And I want to add one more thing to this. I learned something about myself because I had done that a lot. Now, you remember when Daryl, because We're friends, everybody. Remember when Daryl had his knee replacement?
Oh yeah.
And I wrote the article because I decided I was not going. He had insurance to have somebody come in the home. And I said, no, I'm going to do it because I wanted to prove that I could be a good caregiver. I am not. That man on day 4, you remember this? I sat in
do.
my living room crying because I thought, if he says my name one more time. And I find like it was like every 15 minutes, like Cheryl, I did the remote. Cheryl, I need this. Cheryl, I have to go potty. Cheryl. I was like, oh my gosh. And I remember sitting in this office and he said my name and I was like, coming. And then I went and did what he wanted for the 75th time that day already. I sat down and then I realized a couple of things. One, please, everybody needs a long-term care policy. Please get them and use them. Because it was just driving me nuts. And I wrote an article and it got published because I was just so frustrated. I realized it's just not my cup of tea. I cannot do that. And so the caregivers out there today, they're angels on earth. They are truly angels on earth. And it kind of does lead to what we're talking about because, I'd love to understand how we get to financial abuse because, in my situations, I was the financial provider of them. I wasn't really abusing anybody from that perspective, but I realized I'm not meant to be a caregiver. All these people on this call are probably going, don't ever listen to this crazy fraud. But I mean, I'm being really honest. It takes a
Hey,
lot of
but
people
that's
that's vulnerable.
actually important, Cheryl. Honesty is the best policy. If you know that that's not for you, boy, what another level of why you should financially prepare for caregiving.
Yeah.
If you see this coming, if you have parents, if you have a spouse, if you have someone who has early onset Alzheimer's or dementia or whatever, you see it coming and you know this is not for you, you better start creating a bucket for the finances to take care of this because otherwise you are going to fall into elder abuse and not financially, but unfortunately the other way. So
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So you need to know that every single state actually has a statute about financial elder abuse now. They're relatively new. The one in Pennsylvania is really new. And there's civil problem penalties and criminal penalties, but it can be a crime. You can go to jail for stealing money from an old person. But also know that it's not just elder abuse. It also can be what they call a care dependent person. So it can be somebody who's 40 years old and on workers comp, right? And you have access or you are in charge of their finances for that amount of money or that amount of time, and you're taking care of their finances. So it's not, don't just think of this as old people. Young people have strokes, young people have accidents, young people have piles of money that somebody else might come in and be taking care of. Now, you are in the financial services community, all of you in some fashion or another. And you may be in one of 3 buckets. I have my 3 buckets here. See, these are famous Orla Kiley Irish designer buckets somebody gave me. Okay, so the first bucket is you're a financial advisor. So you might be in charge of their money. And so there's ways that you need to look at this that maybe you're not paying attention to. The second bucket is you may or may not be a fiduciary, but if you are, that raises you to an even higher level of you better be paying attention because you can really get in trouble and you may even go to jail because you're considered a trusted person. Now, here's the crazy part. Trusted people by definition in the statute are spouses, relatives, advisors, and it's very broad, but it could be anybody who has access to money and is a trusted person. So spouses are not protected. Keep that in the back of your mind, especially if you're working with spouses, right? Because if they think a spouse is stealing money, which is a crazy thought, but could be done, and I'll explain to you how, that can be something you're going to have to figure out how to pay attention to and what can you do about it. The third bucket is you as a person. This could happen to you, not as a financial advisor, not as a fiduciary, but as a caregiver and as a person, right? Or as somebody who's getting care, quite frankly. So those are the buckets we're going to talk about. So you know that abuse can occur, and it's just really defined as you're in a position of trust and you wrongfully take someone's assets in some fashion. That's pretty much the general gist of it. And it is the trusted person thing can be anybody. It can be a caregiver who comes in and you're paying $25 an hour to be there. They can become a trusted person. So it's very, very broad. because you are a financial advisor, you're probably not seeing this, right? But what you're seeing, if you're paying attention, might be some wonky places where they're taking money out of their investments, or they're calling you, I need $10,000. I need $2,000. I need, and all of a sudden this seems weird to you. And it's not your client who's calling you, or it is your client, but you've always dealt with the wife and now it's the husband who's calling you. So that's a little wonky. That's a little weird. And so you need to pay attention. And as I've talked about many, many times, you all know that IRAs, 401ks, 403bs are owned by one person and one person only. So if you have a spouse trying to get into that money, and if they even have a power of attorney that allows them to get into that money, and they've never done it before, you might want to start paying attention as to why is this happening? What's going on? Now, here's the problem, and attorneys and financial advisors are very much the same in a lot of ways. We have a code of ethics that doesn't allow us to talk to people about what's going on with our clients, right? You have compliance issues. You also have a code of ethics. You can't just go out there and start telling people Joe Smith has money, right? And I'm worried about him. So you have to be careful about the conversations. I say, a priest, a financial advisor, and a lawyer walk into the bar and they can't talk to anybody because you can't. You have to be very, very careful who you're talking to and what you're saying. But even knowing that's true, especially if you're a fiduciary, if you start to see weird things, most of your solutions, I believe, are going to be practical, not really legal. So, what do I mean by that? Go visit your client. If it's a physical way that you can go visit your client, go visit your client. If they're in a nursing home near you, go visit them. See what's going on. Talk to the staff. See what you see, right? I had lunch with a friend yesterday who was the chief administrator of a brain injury conglomerate that actually had people live there all the time. And I was asking her about this. Tell me about what would happen if you would see financial abuse. And she said, we had a spouse who was taking all of her husband's money, he was in his 40s. It was workers' comp money, and she wasn't paying for his prescriptions. She wouldn't buy him any clothing. She wouldn't come to visit. She wouldn't pick him up. And I said, so what did you do? She said, fortunately for us, because they were like a nursing home, they were a healthcare provider, right?
Yep.
So they couldn't call up anybody and just say whatever. Now, this woman was a guardian. She was appointed a guardian of her husband because, of course, she didn't have any powers of attorney papers because none of our clients do at age 40. Um, that actually turned out to be a good thing because she had given them permission to also notify the brother of what was going on. So they would keep a list of all this stuff and they kept notifying him and saying, this is a little uncomfortable for us. We can't get prescriptions. And ultimately, he went and took the guardianship away from her. She had the court come in. He had the court come in, and the facility testified on his behalf.
Yeah, I
So,
told you Daryl works in geriatrics.
right,
With he's a physical therapist, so he works with people in pain, right? So he's going in the off, and he's amazed. He's become very astute. A lot of it with some of the stuff that you've been teaching, your books and stuff like that,
yeah,
where he walks in now and he looks at things with a much different eye.
yes.
And
Do you have the proper paperwork, et cetera?
exactly.
The biggest complaint about lawyers is they don't stay in touch with their clients. They don't return calls. They don't answer emails. They don't answer texts. Don't be that person. And I know a lot of you have clients in Florida and you live in Missouri, right?
Yeah.
I understand that. But look at what we can do today. We can have Zoom calls.
Yeah.
Isn't this awesome? Right? And if they're in a facility and they can't do that, then you can at least you can check in with the wife just to say, how are they doing? That's not violating any kind of code of ethics of any kind. That's just say, how's your husband? I know he hasn't been well. You've got to have a relationship with these people so that you can, when you see something weird, have a conversation that is not
Yeah.
out of line with what you've been doing. You have to watch their activity. And I would assume that all of you have annual meetings with your clients. Maybe that's not enough when they get to a certain age. Maybe that when they're older, you want to start having biannual meetings. You might want to have a group meeting with their attorney. I would highly recommend that. Cheryl knows I recommend this all the time. We're a team. We should be on the team together. If they're perfectly healthy, you should be meeting with their attorney and their accountant. You should be on their team, not just their person with their money, because you don't want to be the person who allowed something to happen where money was getting stolen because you weren't paying attention or you weren't talking to the accountant or you weren't talking you because when something goes wrong, I got to tell you, the first person they come to is not me. The first person they come to is the money person all the time. So if you could have done something, I'm not saying anything bad would happen, but if you could have done something, I would hate for something bad to happen. Ask for their documents. If you don't have their powers of attorney, shame on you. And if they don't have powers of attorney, if they say we don't have that, sorry, but shame on you. They have to have them. You have to get them and you have to see them and you have to read them. I do you saw some of you probably that I had this great, accolade that one of the top 10 articles of Rethinking 65 was an article that I wrote about how can your client have $2 million and become destitute? And it all surrounds that power of attorney power and whether or not they have access to their spouse's big, huge, fat 401k, IRA, 403b. Now, if they have access through a power of attorney, they are now maybe going to be doing things they shouldn't do. And if you're the financial advisor in charge of that, you should be seeing those withdrawals coming out and you should be asking questions. And you can. You're in charge of it. And your client, I hate to say this, it kills me to say this, but your client is not the spouse. Your client is the one who has the money. That's who your client is. That whole other story about you should be talking to the spouse is something you should be doing when they're both healthy. That's a different
Yeah.
conversation for a different day. So let's say that you're seeing this. You're seeing money go out. You're getting no good explanation. It's scary to you. And you've tried every avenue you have available to you. You've talked to the person that you think it should be. You've not gotten any results. You are pretty certain something bad is happening. The legal avenue available to you is aging and adult services or adult protective services. It's called different things but there's one in every state and there's usually one in every county. And they will come in and they will investigate. That's how this gets moved, the needle moved forward. It's kind of a last resort. And I will tell you, here's a perfect example. The story I told you about the wife stealing her husband's money. They talked to the husband because he wasn't completely without capability. And he said, she's my wife. I don't want to get her in trouble.
Yeah.
So, and all the articles deal with that families don't usually want their family members going to jail, right? They usually don't want that. But if you are at your wit's end and you're seeing thousands of dollars disappearing and this person needs it for care, and then we step up your level of responsibility to a fiduciary, I don't know. With the new laws, I would certainly check the law out in your state to see what it says, in fact, about financial advisors. We are limited about what we can say and who we can talk to. I am as well. So I get that. But we are also required to protect our clients to the best of our ability. So again, that leads us circling all the way back to practical solutions, right? What can we do? That being said, this is a planning conversation. Let's talk about how we can make this not happen, right? Talk to your clients about who their trustworthy person is. And if it's their spouse and they have, like Cheryl almost was required by her family to step out of the workforce to take care of her mother-in-law. Like that's ideally what they wanted her to do,
Yeah.
right? And let's say they did that and that mother-in-law had assets, then get her paid. Get a family caregiver agreement drawn up by an attorney, get her paid, get her 1099, and if she doesn't even need the money, put it in her IRA. Because every legal step you make to contractually show that she's being paid for her work does two things. Number one, it gets her paid, which she absolutely should be doing. We've got to stop this nonsense where family caregivers are not getting paid. We've got to stop it. It's ridiculous. And I don't care if they're even working full time. If she's doing 10 hours a week, she should still get paid for that. Get paid. But the only way to protect that person, and if you think it's legit that that person is doing this, then get a family caregiver agreement. It's very easy to do, and every elder lawyer does it. Okay. So that's one way to protect her and you, to be perfectly honest with you, protects both of you. Okay. So you can do that. You can also even just have the person who is your client write out, this is what I want done with my finances. I do not want to burden my family. So I want to go into a nursing home. Or if my daughter-in-law is going to take care of me, I want her paid, right? This person it's their money should write, this is what I want. If you can catch them before they are ill, before they're incompetent, right? To say that. And then you have a plan in place that you can take this to the district attorney and say, we are not stealing money. We are implementing a plan that allows us to do this. The craziest part about all this, and this is what elder lawyers freak out about, we try to move money around to protect healthy family members, to protect a legacy, to protect a healthy spouse. And then in order to do that, we get the sick person on Medicaid, right?
Yeah.
So we take the person's money and put it in places where other people will have it. But we now need to even be more adamant that this is a written plan, because that can be seen as stealing their money. Because we want to get them on Medicaid. Getting someone on Medicaid is you have to make them poor. You know that, right?
Yes.
That you have to basically deplete their assets and make them poor. But making them poor doesn't mean their assets necessarily have paid for their care. It might be that you have found ways to legally put it in places that a healthy spouse now has enough money to live her life, and you can also continue a legacy for their grandchildren or whatever they wanted, right? And we do that a lot. But with this new law about basically stealing money from old people, we have to be much more careful about showing that this was a plan with the person who got sick. This is what they wanted us to do, because they do have exceptions inside this law that say, okay, if they had a plan to protect money, then we are okay with that. That's not stealing. So you need to be on that same page, which again, you need to talk to the elder lawyer who's in charge, or you need to get your clients to an elder lawyer so they have the proper documents, which is almost 99% powers of attorney, with all the authority inside of it that it needs, mostly gifting and change of beneficiaries, and ultimately maybe a trust, and ultimately the will. But wills are for dead people, right? Wills are for dead people. This is
Yep.
not what we're talking about. We're talking about live people who are sick, and that's powers of attorney and possible trusts. And so then I have a whole list of stuff, which I might just give to Cheryl and she can put out to you. And I don't know, but it's a list of things that your clients can do. Like, don't give them you guys, my mom's 94. I think I have this conversation with her every other day. And my mom is great. My mom drives a car. She goes to the hairdresser. She goes to the gym. Like, she's awesome. But somebody calls her on the phone. You won the XYZ sweepstakes. Okay. So
I love Mary Ann.
she's the best. She's
She
the
is the
best.
best.
But now she yells at her friends. Now she's like, don't tell them anything. Don't give them your credit card. Don't buy gift cards. Don't give them your social security. I'm like,
But
she's
that's
getting
actually
better.
good, right? That's good that she's spreading the love that way too.
Yes.
It's helping.
Yes. Yes. But seriously, lock up your checkbook. If you're having caregivers come in the house all the time, you got to lock up the checkbook. I know exactly how to get my mom's checkbook. It's in her
Let me
purse.
tell you something else about checkbooks. And I wish Daryl were here right now watching. Watch out for people who will get an elder person alone with their checkbook,
Yes.
because
Yes.
he sees it at the nursing home, because he's oversees a lot of it, and he'll have people come in, and for the most part, he's pretty quiet, except for if he sees them holding somebody up with a pen in their hand, and he's like,
Yes.
"What's going on here?
Yes.
What's going
Yes.
on here? Are you okay? Do you understand what's going on, Rose? Are you good? Are you like he'll just butt in and ask questions, and you can tell by the response of the person who's there whether or not they should be or not.
I know.
He's like, you can almost pick it up as this many years of caregiving, like being a caregiver of elderly people. Like this person's pretty suspect or this one's not. He says a lot of times he will actually take it upon himself now. And I know this is independent of Daryl, but because he knows a lot about what's going on here, he'll go make a note in their file that this family member, he'll say, what's your name? He puts it in their file. This person came by, had them sign a check, and he puts it in their file.
Good. That's excellent. That's
He's like, I don't
really
want that on
good.
my watch, you know,
That's
and
really good. So obviously this isn't for everyone, every client that you have, but you do have clients that you know, or maybe that have an accident, a sick or stroke, or just, in their 80s and you want to start paying attention because you're a little bit concerned. They're single, they don't have a big family. So check unusual
mm,
activity, have in-person or Zoom meetings with them a little bit more regularly, perhaps to see how they're doing. Maybe two-step verifications. I know it's hard. It's hard for them. I get it, but it certainly is helpful. If they're closing accounts, find out why, right? If they're changing their address for statements, make sure they moved, that this isn't just an address change. What? I noticed I got a change of address request for you. Are you moving? Um, if there's new authority, a power of attorney coming in with a child or whatever, meet with them. Don't just take that paperwork, because honestly, I'm talking about protecting you. That's really, I'm covering you. I mean, yes, it is certainly for your client, but I just don't want you to get caught uh, without having done everything you could possibly do. And tell your client. I mean, if you put out a newsletter, put out you think they've heard this 100 times, how not to get scammed. Put it out 100 times. I would put it in every newsletter. I'd have a scam box, right? Shred your credit cards, lock up your checkbook, shred your bank statements that are old. Never, ever, ever give personal information, and do 2 or 3 every single month, because honestly, you cannot say this enough.
in
And I know
16,
Joy,
14, 16-point font.
yes. And I know Joy will agree with me that as many times as I say people need to have powers of attorney, nobody has them. I can say this every day. I can say it to my own family every day, and there's still going to be people who don't have them, which is a critical, critical piece to the work that I do. And so if you're dealing with money and your clients are dealing with money, every time you put out a newsletter thing, have a little box about scamming and what not to do. Say no, even to a family member. Verify, verify, verify. Call a trusted family member if somebody calls you up and says they need your social security number. Have that as a constant thing. If somebody calls and asks you for financial information, you hang up and you call your daughter or your son or whoever it is, right? Every single time. Like, you cannot hit them over the head enough to stop financial abuse. You just can't, because it every day they come up with something new. Every day.
This is so good. This is so good. Does anybody have questions? I was Claire.
More comments. The checkbook, by the way, go through the entire checkbook, because there is a little game where they pull out a check from the middle of the stack, so you don't see the numerical. You're like, oh, the checks are here. So it's looking through that one.
So
And
good.
Cathy, your circle of care, the team that you refer to,